Hi, we're the Napa Jordan Peterson podcast, and tonight we're going to be trying to take apart some of Peterson's analysis of Karl Marx and what he says or perceived to say, and whether that's true or not.
I generally like the way Jordan Peterson suggests that people talk with each other. And here's something that Peterson said, speaking of something he calls the Rogerian method. Says the advantage to employing the Rogerian method is the difficulty it poses to the careless construction of straw man arguments. When someone opposes you, it is very tempting to oversimplify, parody, or distort his or her position. This is a counterproductive game, designed both to harm the dissenter and to unjustly raise your personal status. So here Peterson is quite rightly pointing out what far too many debates turn into is just the straw manning of each other, just kind of making a false caricature of what the other person's argument is and then attacking that. But I believe I can say without exaggeration that I think that this is exactly what Peterson does with every single time he talks about Marxism. I think he does nothing but offer straw man arguments. There may have been one or two times that I can vaguely remember he sort of went a little bit more in a steel man argument direction, but like I say, I think without exaggeration I can say he almost never follows his own advice when it comes to Marxism. And it's not a small thing because he is on a real crusade against Marx and Marxism, and he's explicit about this. So this is a pretty central, we're often defined by our enemies, and he defines himself. He clearly says who his main enemy is, and he uses the word, he says it's Karl Marx. And so I'd say that's a pretty serious
Oversight,
to put it mildly, yeah. If he's really straw manning Marx.
All right, well, let's jump into the first example we got set up here of something Jordan Peterson claims.
So Jordan Peterson says that, actually read both of these quotes. He says, anyone with more than a cursory knowledge of the 20th century history who dares to claim simultaneously that they have compassion for the downtrodden and that they are Marxists are revealing either an ignorance of history that is so astounding that it's actually a form of miracle, or a kind of malevolence that is so reprehensible that it's almost unspeakable. And then, speaking about Solzhenitsyn, he says, Solzhenitsyn wrote the truth, his truth, hard-learned through his own experiences in the camps, exposing the lies of the Soviet state. No educated person dared defend that ideology again after Solzhenitsyn published the Gulag Archipelago. No one could ever say again what Stalin did. That was not true communism. Now, Jordan Peterson makes clear that he pretty much blames Marx for what happened in Stalinist Russia, and he claims that it's based on Marxist ideas. So, I mean, in that quote, he's not specifically saying that no one could ever say again what Stalin did was not true Marxist communism. But from everything he says, it's pretty clear that that's what he means. Now, as a matter of fact, many educated people, including myself, but people like Yanis Varoufakis and Richard Wolff and David Harvey, and many very well-educated people with a pretty strong knowledge of history do in fact say that very thing, that what Stalin did was not true communism.
But do you think the idea of communism still has some strength and something to teach us and to change?
Well, the word communism is very badly tainted by the experience of communism, which had nothing to do with communism. Communism where it was practiced had as much to do with the idea of communism as the Spanish Inquisition had with Jesus Christ. Precisely no connection. Yeah.
So, according to Peterson, we all must be either astoundingly ignorant of history or unspeakably malevolent. But I'd like to just provide a couple quotes here from Marx that I hope would at least call into some doubt this idea that what happened under Stalin was true Marxist communism. Okay, so here's something that Marx said. Marx wrote, we are not among those communists who are out to destroy personal liberty, who wish to turn the world into one huge barrack or into a gigantic workhouse. There certainly are some communists who, with an easy conscience, refuse to countenance personal liberty and would like to shuffle it out of the world because they consider that it is a hindrance to complete harmony. But we have no desire to exchange freedom for equality. So, to me, that seems like that's the Marx that I like, that's the Marx that I'm attracted to, and I, with Marx, would say I also have no desire to exchange freedom for equality. I'm not willing to do the things that Stalin did, and that wouldn't be at all what I would be aiming for, and it certainly wasn't what Marx was aiming for. And then Engels, who was Marx's right-hand man, so they were virtually identical in terms of what they thought and believed. Engels wrote this. He said, complete self-government on the American model. This is what we too must have. How self-government is to be organized and how we can manage without a bureaucracy has been shown to us by America. So, what's described here by both Marx and Engels is, I would call, the antithesis of Stalinism. It's the exact opposite. It has nothing to do with what was happening in Stalin. Now, there may be some way in which some other aspects of Marx, may have led to something like that, but but at the very least, I just want to point out that educated people can say, yes, that's not true communism. That's not what Marx was aiming at, and that's not what we Marxists are aiming at. There's a much longer quote which we might go into, which is Erich Fromm is quoting Marx, and Erich Fromm introduces it this way. He says, what Marx would have thought of a system such as Soviet communism, he expressed very clearly in a statement of what he called crude communism, and which referred to certain communist ideas and practices of his time. Now, this is what Marx wrote, and obviously, Marx died before the Russian Revolution ever happened, so, but he's clearly, this could be a critique of what Stalinism was. So Marx says, this crude communism appears in a double form. The domination of material property looms so large that it aims to destroy everything which is incapable of being possessed by everyone as private property. So just let's take that one sentence. Jordan Peterson often claims that Marx was all about material well-being and materialism and all this kind of stuff, but Marx is saying this is crude communism. This is the kind of communism that Marx hates, where the domination of material property looms so large that it aims to destroy everything which is incapable of being possessed by everyone as private property. So it's like, no, and the next sentence is even stronger. It says, this crude communism wishes to eliminate talent, etc., by force. Immediate physical possession seems to it the unique goal of life and existence. So, there aren't, I really have not heard so-called anti-communists out there like Jordan Peterson and Shapiro and other people who actually are more passionate in their condemnation of communism than Marx. But of course, Marx is condemning something he's calling crude communism, not his communism, not what he means by communism. So that word can mean many different things to people, like it does. But Marx is clearly saying that it's not all about physical possession and everyone having everything, and it's certainly not about like destroying talent. So if someone's talented, you don't want to just like bring them down just because everyone's supposed to be equal. Because as he said before, if it's a choice between personal liberty and equality, he takes personal liberty, and so do I.
So why do you think everyone gets it wrong?
Not everyone does get it wrong. I don't get it wrong. Millions of people in the world don't get it wrong. So, not true that everyone gets it wrong.
Okay.
Why do some people get it wrong?
Yes.
I think Noam Chomsky, there's a great little clip, a 3-minute clip about how in the Cold War, for one thing, Stalin wanted people to think that he was Marxist, right? Because Marx, properly understood, has a wide appeal, almost a universal appeal to people, because of what it really is. So he wanted the cachet of Marx, and he wanted to wrap himself in the flag of Marx. So from the Soviet side, that's one of the reasons why they wanted everyone to think this is what Marx wanted. And then from the American side, they wanted everyone to think, yeah, that's right, that's what Marx wanted, and you don't want that. Because the ruling oligarchies, the ruling rich classes in the United States also did not want what Marx was really talking about. So they said, look at Soviet Russia, and that's what Marx wants, so you don't want Marx. So the real Marx, because of that Cold War competition or whatever, was almost eliminated in a way from the consciousness of many, many people, but certainly not all.
Why do you think communism has been perverted so many times from its origins? Is it just people in power abusing power?
It's not. I mean, that's a kind of a different question about, like, I don't agree with the premise that it has been perverted. You'd have to ask, where has Marxist communism even been tried, first of all?
Mm-hmm.
And then,
well, I think that's kind of the point, though. It hasn't really been tried, right?
Well, it is. I mean, every time.
Well, on a large scale.
Yeah, but it's not. That's also a kind of misconception of what Marx is all about. The Marxist program is a long-term program about democratizing society. So it's not an overnight revolution. It's not that thing. So anytime that the power of capital, the power of the few people who own capital, is checked by democracy or by something, that would be a Marxist victory. So it's a different way of looking at it. So the fact that in the early 1900s, people died on the streets in order to win the right to unionize, that would be a Marxist victory, because the working class, most people are getting a chance to have more ownership of their own labor and the fruits of their labor. So that's the main Marxist goal, is for people to have control over their own labor and the fruits of their labor. Under capitalism, it's the owner who owns the business who controls the fruits of everyone's labor. So Marxist idea is to democratize that. So anytime that happens, it's going in the right direction. And anytime the reverse happens, it's going against it. I mean, the Soviet-Russian example is, it started, for one thing, it started in a backward country, not a very industrialized country, so it didn't have a very large working class. It just was peasants mostly. So it was not a country that Marx would have even thought of as a place to try socialism. But it also started in the Russian Revolution started in the middle of World War I. So it started in the middle. The mass death was already happening. Okay, so people were already dying by the thousands and millions in World War I. So the Russian Revolution, at least it took Russia out of it. There was some success in that sense. I think the motto was peace and bread. So they wanted just peace and food. But people had already died by the thousands, and the violence was already there. And a lot of the revolutionaries were actually killed in the war. So it started off, you couldn't imagine sort of a worse potential beginning.
Lots of chaos.
And then not only that, but after the revolution happened, which was relatively bloodless, the actual communist revolution, there were many communists and many socialist groups. It wasn't just Bolsheviks, just lots and lots of socialists. But they were all socialists, but many different kinds. And it was so popular that it was more or less bloodless, because the soldiers came over to it and the train workers came over to it, so they didn't have to fight anybody. But after the revolution succeeded, there was the counter-revolution and the civil war that followed. Mm-hmm. And that civil war, the White Russians, not the Red Russians, but the White Russians were backed by very powerful Western capitalist interests, including, I think, even Finland and England and France and the United States. So all these countries put troops on Soviet soil. So the United States invaded the Soviet Union. We put American troops on Soviet soil to help push back the revolution, and that was bloody. So not only did you have the war, the revolution took Russia out of that, but immediately went into a civil war backed by Western capitalist powers to destroy it. So, it just, that's not going to work. Too much death and too much destruction. Too much poverty. Too much disease. So, no chance.